Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming to this discussion on the Internet of Things. This is a huge subject, but we have a star-studded panel to help elucidate, inform, and provoke today. I'm Christian de Koene. I'm the assistant of the European Data Protection Supervisor and assistant European Data Protection Supervisor, and I've been closely involved in the development of our project on digital ethics, looking at the longer-term implications for society and individuals of technological phenomena like the Internet of Things. And before I introduce my fellow panelists, permit me to exercise Chair's prerogative for a few moments in order to set the scene. The Internet of Things is predicted to have a profound effect on all aspects of life, from telemedicine to transportation, from clothes to climatology, from smart cities to smart farms. Its characteristics have been neatly summarized in the opinion of the European Group on Ethics in Science in 2014 as miniaturization, ubiquity, and automation. And we've all heard the breathless forecasts about the Internet of Things, that there are more connected devices than people in the world now, that at some time after 2020, soon after 2020, there will be 20 billion to 50 billion devices in circulation. So the first question for the panel is, where are we with the Internet of Things in Europe? What are the benefits, and whom is it meant to benefit? The second question, what are the policy implications? Or to put it more succinctly, is it sustainable? More connected devices means more personal information than ever, stored on remote servers, and technological developments mean virtually all information could be viewed as personally identifiable. And these data are not necessarily from the users, are not necessarily about the users, but they're also about people who the users may come into contact with, and it may be unknown to the users of those devices as well as those other people. So will this exponential growth in devices and data continue? Some argue that Moore's law will cease to apply beyond 2020 unless there's a nanotech revolution in the processing capacity of computers. But technical sustainability also depends on storage capacity. It's been said that the worldwide internet, if it was a country, it would be the 12th largest consumer of electricity in the world. And we know that the largest data center in the world is being constructed, due for completion this year at Langfang in northeast China, and it will be the same size as the Pentagon. So there's enormous pressure from shareholders and venture capitalists to monetize this data. Technical sustainability means also connectivity speeds, which are not evenly distributed among regions and income groups. And then, of course, there's legal and ethical sustainability. And at this conference, we're interested in whether the rollout of the Internet of Things will be founded on respect for the individual, accountability of vendors, and data controllers and data security. Current indications are that there are too many Internet-enabled devices which lack enough security. Should the onus not be on the vendors and data controllers rather than just on the users to ensure sufficient security? Also, the value chains are very long, with many stakeholders involved in data processing of devices which can communicate with each other. So we will perhaps also consider the impact of the General Data Protection Regulation on the Internet of Things, provisions such as for the right to data portability, what it means for so-called walled gardens of intranet of things in relation to different providers, privacy assessments, privacy by design, profiling, the right to be forgotten, the concept of consent, the list goes on. So Internet of Things devices and platforms are expected to exchange data and store them on service providers' infrastructures. So security, therefore, depends on devices, but also communications links, storage infrastructure, and other inputs of this ecosystem. What's the role of resource-intensive encryption, anonymization, and pseudonymization, for example? And if we're honest, is security getting better or worse? We read at the weekend about Shodan, the search engine for the Internet of Things, have now a section which allows their users to browse millions of vulnerable webcams using their real-time streaming protocol. to share these webcams which share videos without any password authentication in place. So is there a race to the bottom with these webcam manufacturers and other device manufacturers which are connected to the internet? Consumers do not seem to perceive the value of privacy and security until it actually affects them. Therefore, will raising consumer awareness be enough to solve the problem? Third and final question, how would privacy and security work in practice? The Internet of Things does enable very detailed profiles of individuals for companies and potentially for malware. The debate about mandatory backdoors in Europe and in the US indicates that this is actually one of the most important questions for democracy and freedom in the internet age. So much for the background. Now to introduce our panel. Christoph Luykx, our moderator, is Director of Government Relations for CA Technologies, based here in Brussels. Previously, he was at Intel Corporation and at the US Department of State as an economic specialist at the United States mission to the EU, again, obviously here in Brussels. He's the Vice Chair of the Digital Economy Committee at the American Chamber of Commerce in the EU, as well as being active in various trade associations. Further to my right, Paul Francis. Professor Francis is a director at the Max Planck Institute for Software Systems in Germany and co-founder of the startup Aircloak. Paul's research is focused on privacy-enhancing technologies, and his research group is working closely with Aircloak to develop and deploy the next generation of anonymized analytics solutions. Paul has held research positions at Cornell University and Belcor in the USA, NTT Software Labs in Japan, and 2 Silicon Valley startups. Thibaut Kleiner is head of the Network Technologies Unit in DG CONNECT in the European Commission. His unit leads on research and innovation in the area of wireless optical networks, network architectures, Internet of Things, SATCOM, and he manages 5G PPP. Thibaut has been with the Commission since 2001, and previously he was the head of the coordination unit in DG Competition and a member of the cabinet of both cabinets of Nelly Cruz during her mandates. Anna Pouliou is corporate privacy and data protection leader for Europe at GE, again based in Brussels. She manages the GE Privacy and Data Security Legal Program and the related public policy program in Europe. She has previously worked as senior counsel at First Data Corporation in Frankfurt and has been counsel to Euroclear Bank, the Bank of New York Mellon, and the National Bank of Greece. Her experience is focused on privacy, data protection, data security, antitrust, regulatory compliance, financial services, e-payments, and EU government affairs. I think that covers everything, doesn't it?
Yeah, pretty much.
And finally, but certainly not least, Antoinette Rouvroy is Doctor of Laws at the European University Institute, Permanent Research Associate at the Belgian National Fund for Scientific Research, at the Research Centre Information, Law and Society Law Faculty at the University of Namur. She is also a member of the French Data Protection Authority, the CNIL Foresight Committee, and is appointed expert for the Council of Europe, where she has been writing a superb paper on big data. So a very impressive panel, and I'll now hand you over to Christoph, who will steer the discussion.
Thank you, Christian. One thing that I concluded from that is we all have to shorten our bios, but so we have kind of a half an hour, I would say. So Christian, I think, outlined perfectly some of the challenges, opportunities and challenges around IoT. I think it's going to be a challenge to talk about all of those topics, but my role as a moderator, I'll try to at least touch on some of those and try to be provocative where possible. So I actually want to immediately dive into it. And so when we talk about IoT, there is a range of ideas that people have on what it actually is. So what I wanted to do is ask from a GE perspective. So Anna, can you actually give one example from a GE perspective on what IoT means for you?
It's machines speaking. It's machines speaking to each other, actually, and that's going to be a major development. I think I have to speak in practical terms so that everybody understands why this is, it's not something that should scare us, it's the contrary. It's a big challenge. GE, as you know, is active in a variety of products. I mean, we are in transportation, aviation, in healthcare, in power. So you see a vast, a huge variety of manufacturing products. So, for instance, where we could use data and where we could have machines connected and get data and provide something meaningful, I would give one example, perhaps from the healthcare department, the healthcare business. You know of MRI machines, so GE is a manufacturer of MRI machines, magnetic scanning. So we have a variety of contracts with hospitals. What we would like to see is when you go to an MRI machine, how could we improve that so that, for instance, a baby that needs to have a scan could have a lower dose of radiation potentially than an individual that is, tall and perhaps of bigger dimensions. I mean, imagine of an infant that is born with some deficiency and needs to go through regular scans. Do we need to expose a baby to the same radiation with an adult, for instance? But, to reach actually some meaningful conclusions, we need vast amounts of data. So we could, and there is a product underway where we're analyzing data coming of various MRI machines interconnected. And we don't have the name of a patient, we don't know who it is, but we have a scan, we have the age, we have the sex, we have the weight of the patient, and that, of course, implies huge amounts of data, machines speaking to each other and coming up with analytics that give us, a meaningful example, result, where we could come up with improved machines with doses of radiation that can vary according to age and weight. This is just one example, and I could go on and on. Same with, since we started in the healthcare department, same thing about people having a stroke. I mean, to process, a scan of the brain, currently we are like at above 4 hours to actually get the results. But, you cannot avoid a stroke, for instance, after 4 hours. So we need to improve those machines. From the moment that they start speaking to each other and, analyzing data, I think we can come up with really better standards of healthcare and also better standards of safety in the aviation department, for instance, when we look at aircraft engines. And I improved also, results for instance, trains and so on. I can give you also a number, and I'll close with that. The savings that could be added, well, actually, the savings are so significant that, in fact, we could speak about an improved EU GDP by 2030 of 2.2 trillion just by the industrial internet.
Thank you, Anna. So, Thibaut, is that the same figure that you have been using, or is there another figure? Basically, what's, from the Commission's perspective, the opportunity for Europe, but maybe also if you can already highlight some of the challenges that you see that are out there.
Very interesting examples, and in terms of figures, I think with the Internet of Things, you always get these huge numbers. We did a study last year where we also had the estimate from IDC that by 2020, the market for the Internet of Things, if you take into account hardware, software, and services, would be around 1 trillion euros. So it's not quite 2 trillions, but it's gigantic. Essentially, it's more or less the size of a lot of what we are doing in much of the ICT industry to some extent. And there is a problem of scoping whenever we talk about the Internet of Things. At my level, so I'm in charge of somehow the unit that deals with the Internet of Things from a technology perspective and from a policy perspective. What we see is that we are not there yet in terms of the full version of the Internet of Things. In a sense that a lot is happening around data already, and we have this view that there may be 4 stages somehow around the Internet of Things. The first one is where we are now, where you start using data for a lot of innovation, but in a kind of siloed perspective. So you have, for instance, the wearables where, it collects data about you, it puts it together in a kind of a cloud, and you get some analytics. At the same time, we see already the premise of this notion of Industry 4.0, if you want to call it like this, or industrial internet, where several machines can start integrating and working together through more kind of closed networks, again, based on data, but not only, because there's also about robotics involved. But where it really gets interesting, and where I think really the Internet of Things is at its genuine meaning, is when you start cutting across areas, when you start combining data from, a healthcare system and data that comes from other sources of information, from hospitals, from statistical elements, and so on. And this is where the innovation potential is the greatest, but it is where also the challenge is also the biggest. And, earlier this year, someone was asking me, what is the motto for you for IoT in 2016? And I said, for me, it's the Empire Strikes Back, just in the Star Wars theme, also because what I see very much at the moment is that this vertical industry, so one sector doing healthcare, one sector doing transport, one sector doing elements for agriculture even, they are approaching the IoT from their angle and trying actually to prevent these cross-cutting elements. So preventing somehow the free flow of data that is the basis for this more innovative element. So at the EU level, we are very much aware of this, that we are probably at a turning point in the next 2 years, where it's either we make it somehow, or we will have a much slower development and uptake of the Internet of Things, and at least for 2 reasons. I mean, the first one, as mentioned, is because the business models, the industrial incentives to adopt this Internet of Things across areas is not really very clear. Who is going to win? I mean, many people, I think, in Europe are very much afraid of the like of, Apple and Google and those that were somehow winning in the mobile revolution, expanding now in all the industrial applications. At the same time, we are very much aware that Europe has a lot of strength. If you look at even software elements, the next device of the future may actually not be your phone. It may be something else, like your car or actually your T-shirt, that would be connected and providing a lot of new possibilities. So it's not obvious at all that if you look at the IoT, the same companies will be the winning in tickets in the future. So that's the first challenge, really, creating these networks across industries, and this could be very much an obstacle because each of them are trying to prevent somehow this to happen at the moment. You see that from standardization, we have a myriad of standards that are not always compatible. The second thing we see at the level of the union is I would say the consumer issue. And there I think it goes to somehow privacy to a large extent and also security and ethics. In the back, somehow of people's mind, they probably think about these sci-fi movies and, where robots or connected machines are taking over civilization. And probably, that's I'm not sure it's a genuine risk, but nevertheless, there is a lot of resentment sometimes about machines and about connected systems. So what we think is that at the moment, the most important is to make the Internet of Things human. And I will stop there because I spoke already too long. So essentially, what we are doing right now is launching a set of large-scale pilots with genuine users so that we can really test in practice what the IoT is doing with people and what the business models can be so that you can monetize this huge opportunity.
Thank you, Thibaut. So the force awakens in Europe on the IoT. So that's one conclusion. The other thing is, what I pick up when you said is we have a 2-year window, kind of a turning point. So you mentioned, of course, the consumer angle, privacy, security being important there. And so to what extent, that's of course for the debate now, to what extent privacy, security could become actually obstacles or not, or enablers that could help or hinder turning around the corner in the next 2 years. So to focus a bit on the privacy aspect now. So think, Christian, I heard you say that when we talk about data, a lot of the data, maybe almost all of the data, will be personal. So when you talk about IoT and all the data being exchanged, was that a correct understanding from my side when you opened?
Well, thanks. A lot of the data may be a lot of the very most valuable data in terms of being able to monetize it may well be personal data, and even if it may not appear to be personal because of the linkages, the potential for linking data from different sets, as I think Thibaut mentioned, means that it's more people are more identifiable from this data than ever before.
Yeah, so Antoinette, just from your perspective, when you look at big data, IoT, would you share that perspective that when we talk about data that flows around in that context, in general we should assume that's all personal data?
In fact, yes. The fact is that our legal regime of data protection is put under huge crisis. The mere definition of personal data becomes a little bit outdated by the new environment we are in. In fact, all the legal categories of data are overwhelmed by what happens. Not only personal data, everything can become personal data, because even the consumption data, the data relating to what you buy in a supermarket, if you are followed in your buyings in a supermarket for 1 month, algorithms can detect that you are at higher risk than the average population to get heart disease or to get lung cancer or to get a lot of different diseases, maybe with more accuracy than a medical doctor could do. So everything, even data that are even not personal at all, which are anonymized, are susceptible both to be correlated and linked with other data, other anonymized data, and through that through that aggregation, you can be re-identified. So the notion of anonymous data is really put under pressure. But also the distinction that we make in the law between personal data and personal and sensitive data is put under huge pressure. So it's all our basic concepts which are really challenged, and that's important because it relates to the very scope of data protection instruments. If you are, the law in general says that whenever you have anonymous data, then really anonymous data, the data protection regime doesn't have to apply, and you are free to do whatever you want with the data. But that doesn't mean that when you have anonymous for the law, when you have anonymous data, that you are not exposed as a subject to re-identification and also to a very fine characterization of your future behaviors, of your future risks, health risks, and a lot of other sensitive aspects. So in fact, what happens is really, and I would say it's really a paradigm shift that we have to take into account when thinking about regulating the Internet of Things, ambient intelligence, ubiquitous computing, big data. In fact, we are really in a new paradigm, a new visibility of individual prospects, individual propensities, so the future of the individuals, the opportunities they are carrying in terms of market prospects, or the risks they are carrying. But it's a new visibility without disability, without the possibility for the people who are concerned to tell by themselves whether the predictions that are made about themselves are really do mean something for them from their point of view. So in fact, what happens is really total exposure, and what changes is the nature of data. In fact, we have here data which is not produced anymore on a voluntary or even conscious basis. It's the data we are speaking about in the Internet of Things is comparable to digital pheromones, or the pheromones that animals leave, you know, unintentionally. And, well, there is a very nice philosopher who was called Jacques Derrida, who explained that for him, the difference between humans and animals is the fact that, well, first, humans can respond to any kind of profiles or names that are given to them. Humans can erase their traces, whereas animals cannot. And also, humans can lie. Humans can tell things that are not true. Humans can pretend things. And that was the case before the Internet of Things. We could lie. We could have what we call, in Latin, persona. That is a public person which is different from our private person, from who we feel we are genuinely, you know. But now with the Internet of Things, there is no difference anymore between public persona and private persona. What we lose is the possibility or the capacity of reticence, we say in French, the possibility of not telling the truth, of not telling what our body is capable of, and of not telling it, even if of not disclosing even things of which we are not conscious ourselves. You know, it's the body that speaks for us. We have entered in an era where we have the impression that we can get to the reality, we can grasp the reality, the world itself, without even needing language, nor any kind of transcription, voluntary transcription. And that changed everything in terms of data protection.
So I think there was a lot of great points in there, and I think I just want to turn back to one of the points around anonymization. We have here a company called Aircloak. Maybe you can briefly explain Aircloak and the history, but also what, from a kind of a startup perspective, you're trying to do to address some of these issues.
Yeah, hello. So I'm Paul Francis. Well, he introduced me, so I guess I don't have to do it again. So Aircloak is a small technology startup. We're building a system or a service, both, which provides very high quality data analytics and very strong anonymization. Antoinette used the word anonymization a lot. I'm not sure what context she used it in exactly. But typically, as she said, when people anonymize data, they just take away a little bit of information, and it's not really that strongly anonymized. If you know a little bit about the person, you can usually re-identify them or get back to the individual. So we're building a system. I think we have, in all modesty, I think we've made some tremendous breakthroughs. And we have a system that I would consider strongly anonymous, and yet gives very good analytical results. So we're young. We're just getting started. The technology is quite new, and it's been very interesting to sort of talk to a lot of companies, try to market the data, try to find a business model for the technology, because it's funny. You'd think, well, everybody's worried about privacy, everybody's concerned about their personal information. But getting from there and then having a technical solution and then getting companies to actually pay you for that technology turns out not to be so easy. So we're in the process now. We're learning a lot, but it's an interesting situation, because I think a lot of companies, companies deal with personal data all the time. They just do it on a day-to-day basis. Everybody knows this. And, you know, I mean, I found this panel quite interesting, because, you know, one person will say, well, you know, the data is not private anymore, and it's getting everywhere, and you don't even know it's being collected about you, and blah, 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 and it's kind of scary. And then somebody else will say, yes, but babies will die if we don't get this data, right? And it's the babies will die argument that will win every time, I think. And we all experience this individually, right? I use Google for search all the time. I know every time I make a search, it goes into some database somewhere. Somebody could get that information and actually learn some interesting things about me. But I benefit from this enough that I'm quite willing to do this. And I think this is the status quo. as long as people benefit from this technology, I think they're happy to look the other way. We're not worried too much about the privacy concerns, which really don't affect them on a day-to-day basis anyway. So I think this is the environment. Companies are pretty good about protecting data when they have it. They feel more or less comfortable with that. They wonder why they should do more. And so we're kind of playing in this space, and I think we're making progress, but it hasn't been so easy. I'll stop there, I guess.
Yeah, so that's an interesting point you make there about as long as people benefit from it. What was it? Then basically they will be able, they feel comfortable in general to use it.
Well, they'll look the other way.
So people who disagree with that, raise your hand. So I think most people. Sorry. So that was.
No, I think it's when you benefit personally. So there was another anecdote recently. I was at a meeting where somebody from Mozilla, which is actually a very privacy-conscious company, was giving a talk, and she said, I use Fitbit. I know that my data is going to that company, and they're doing various things with it. But I looked at their privacy policy, and I trust it. And I thought, what the heck? So I looked at their privacy policy, and there, you could read there. It said, well, if we reorganize, we can do anything we want with your data. So I challenged her. I said, come on, this is the typical American privacy policy. And she said, well, I really like my Fitbit. I love what I learned from this thing, and if I could get a device that told me what I ate every day, I would use that too. So I think it's like this. Even privacy-conscious people typically, when they get personal benefit out of a service, they're happy to feel that maybe the privacy is not so bad after all.
So just there will be an opportunity to ask some questions in a bit. So please hold your questions because I feel some people would like to jump in. Antoinette, very briefly, you want to react to that?
Yes, of course, because the baby will die is a very strong argument, of course. But I think we have to have a serious typology of the kind of applications we are speaking of here. Of course, whenever the applications tend to modelize human behaviors, this really raises a lot of different ethical issues than when you use big data for scientific or medical purposes or epidemiologic purposes, of course, or for studying the movement of planets. Of course, from big data and from the ubiquitous collection of data through a lot of sensors, you can get wonderful results. And there is also that idea that nowadays there is an automatic curiosity of algorithms that allow you to discover things that human perception would never be allowed to discover. So they are wonderful indeed, and they can help prevent death sometimes. But whenever it comes to predicting behaviors of individuals or their propensity to agree to pay more for some kinds of goods than other people, and when you can then make a dynamic pricing, meaning that you adapt the price to each person depending of their relative elasticity of their own demands related to the prices. There you have a lot of political issues arising in terms of possibilities of direct or indirect discrimination, etc. And also what we have to realize here is that it's a new truth regime that big data, the computational turn is imposing on us. And that truth regime implies that data is always true, and that data is unbiased, and that data is always exhaustive, whereas we all know that is not the case. Even if you have captors everywhere, or almost everywhere, if you have captors in smartphones of the people, we know that smartphones are not equally distributed in the population. So if you have a public policy based on data collected through smartphones, in fact, you will not have equal concern. You will not, the government will not be so much concerned for people who are less connected, for example. So there are a lot of biases. It looks completely objective. It looks exhaustive. But it's not. There are a lot of things which are just not translatable into a digital form. The dreams of people, their true intentions, In fact, you can simulate a detection of intention through patterns, but through intentions are formed by individuals in their head, and sometimes they don't manifest into any kind of gesture, so they're ineffectuated. But in order to leave digital traces, you need to have a gesture that is effectuated, you know?
So I think so far what we've discussed, there is definitely opportunities. There is obviously some challenges. The question now in front of us is how do we react, respond, solve those challenges? There is a technical way in addressing some of these challenges, and then of course the big question that governments also ask themselves then, is there a legislative way? And of course we've got the almost approved General Data Protection Regulation now. I think that's one clear example of how we can react and provide a legislative framework. Now you can debate if it goes too much into detail or not, but so legislation has a role to play. Now my question is, for Christian, maybe from an EDPS perspective, if you look at the GDPR text that we have now, do you feel that looking at IoT and who knows what the next technological developments will be, that this piece of legislation, or legislation in general, is flexible enough to deal with some of these new questions and challenges?
In a word, yes. I think the question is now how it's going to be applied. It's obviously a very long and complicated text in many ways, and I mentioned some of the key concepts and principles in my introduction, and it really is a question of how the notion of consent is interpreted. It's one of the most misunderstood notions in data protection law, in my experience, that the idea that you have to ask permission to do everything, and then you can tick the box and carry on and do what you intended to do, that can be quite dangerous. And that's a principle which is followed on from the previous regime, which and it needs to be applied in new and sensible ways. A lot will depend on how the data controllers, companies like Aircloak and others, behaving responsibly and taking, when they're using that data, using it responsibly, considering the interests of the individual whose data that concerns. A lot will depend on the data protection authorities and how they enforce it, and the guidance that they will eventually need to provide.
So yes, it's flexible enough. Anna, from a GE perspective, a short answer: yes, no, maybe.
It's very difficult to say, because I'll come back to what Antoinette said about the definition of personal data being outdated. In the example I mentioned before, and I can take another less emotionally charged, not involving kids, involving adults, even old people, measurement of blood sugar. You know that now there are sensors you put in your body, and then that is sent off to a cloud, and you have real-time almost analysis of your blood sugar, so that you can adjust your nutrition accordingly. I mean, we can't stop progress. That is a reality. We can't stay in the Middle Ages because we are afraid that maybe somebody misuses data. We have to be very savvy about enforcement, about controls, about compliance, and so on. One very good tool is the identification. I think we have to really look at the identification very seriously. In the example of the scans I gave before, typically, and since it's my company, I can tell you exactly what the data we have is, and I mentioned it, is we don't have a name and we don't care. We don't want to go further about that individual's thoughts or health condition or something. They're just random images, lots of images. It's just a matter of running the analytics to find out, okay, age, weight, and
but hang on. So
exposure.
let's say you have this data, you have these images. You would love to know 5 years from now how those images map into different health outcomes for those people, yeah? That would tell you a great deal about what the effect of those images was 5 years later, 10 years later.
It's not as if we are giving them a medicine ourselves. So we're
Exactly.
just giving the machine, we're just having
Exactly,
the machine
you're
there.
giving a machine, and other people are eating different things, taking different medicines, having different futures, and it could well be, maybe not in this exact case, but maybe so, but certainly in other cases, that if you knew that information about those people 5 years later, it would help you understand.
No.
Yes.
No, because
Yes, absolutely, yes. Many
No,
doctors
no.
I've talked to absolutely would
but
like
we
to
are
see
not
that
the doctor,
information.
that's the thing. We are the manufacturer. We are creating a machine, and I think that's why people sometimes get confused. What is the identification? Who has the data and what kind of data? I mean, for GE to be able to identify whose image it is, we just have to break into the hospitals, confidential information, and just steal information about, you know, who those patients are. All we are interested in, we just have machines. We don't follow up what's going to happen in 5 years, what is the medical condition, selling them medication.
But you should. That's the thing, you should be able to do that, because everybody will benefit if you can do that.
We are not in that business, I must say. If you want to connect it, that's okay, but then we are getting into all the obstacles and so on. So far,
Exactly.
but then that is going to get even more challenging. But so
Exactly.
far, I mean, do we want such a holistic answer? Right now, what we have is the machines. We want to make sure that we're giving accurate images, that in case of a stroke, a person that is about to have a stroke, we detect it as soon as possible. We improve, you know, the results. We improve the time of the results of the machine. This is it. And of course, this is what is driving us. But my point is, right now, do we need to consider this personal data, that we have to go through all of the restrictions of sending the data, of collecting consents, and what's the value of a consent in this case? Or the amount of data we have is just, perhaps we can identify the individual if we sit down together with the hospital and we compare our data, yes. Or if we break into the hospital, but the hospital cannot disclose the information to us, and we would have to break into the hospital to be able to link the data back together to a specific individual. So I think a lot of those things are pretty safe for the time being. But I do agree with Paul that maybe in the future we want to go this way as humanity as a whole. Do we, and how are we going to do it? And I think that's
I think this goes back also to Thibaut's earlier point about the silos that are there. And if we want to reach the next stage, which could be, for example, the medical data, I think there's a couple of issues that are behind that. But Thibaut, you wanted to react to that?
No, I was about to say exactly this. I mean, it's really interesting to be in between, because I tend to agree that if you pull together more data, I mean, clearly you have to have a richer possibility to analyze. But typically, I mean, what you were saying from a GE perspective, I've heard from other companies who say basically, you know, it's my data. And I'm not going to necessarily share it with someone else because maybe I'm afraid in terms of the data protection enforcement. And the GDPR, I think, is a great, result. And frankly, I was a bit scared when I was hearing that the notions are already outdated, because we don't have the luxury of starting it all over again. I mean, it was such a painful exercise that we better get it work now and make the best out of it. But if we could improve the way it is implemented and enforced, and actually facilitate this kind of trade-offs you were pointing out, where individuals can say, okay, what am I gaining if I share this, and what am I losing potentially? I think we would be better off, and also provide a more sophisticated framework. So I think from a Commission's perspective, that's where we are right now. I mean, we are trying first to get the ink on the GDPR agreement so that we can move on, because for 4 or 5 years now, this has been the hot topic, and still a very complex document that has to be digested. But the next step is to make it work. And one concept we are trying to put forward as regards Internet of Things is this idea that maybe what we need is a label, something that we could call a kind of trusted IoT label, where you can get really some kind of intermediary category, so that okay, that's a very secure system that is providing you a very high degree of privacy, and actually you can maybe price it in. Or on the contrary, for other types of applications, something which is much more relaxed, like the Fitbit you were mentioning maybe, but where you also get a clear reading in terms of, okay, what is it I'm buying, what is it I'm getting in terms of privacy and security protection. So that's a concept we are launching now, this idea of maybe labeling products, services, so that we can have an easier understanding for users. And maybe final point on this, I think we are not there yet. I think that, I like very much what Antoinette was saying. I think it's really fascinating, but I'm not sure that, all these sensors are actually deployed yet. I don't think we are there yet. I'm not sure either that the sharing of data and the free flow of data is happening yet. I mean, in fact, you see more the reverse currently in Europe. I mean, people are saying, okay, cloud has to be located in one country, and to stay there, the data should not be, flowing across borders. So, I mean, there is a lot to be done before we reach the stage where actually these very pertinent questions are real, because, it's happening in real life.
Great. So thanks, Thibaut. So I want to open it also for some questions. Are there already questions there? I think you had one earlier. It's solved. Okay. No, maybe switch.
Jonathan Tralog, software house in France. So it's a panel on policies. So actually, I have a question on policies, and one is rather short term, and one is rather long term because it addresses actually Antoinette. So my question is, there was a discussion about GE not doing the things with Paul, okay? And my question is, what are the duties about the suppliers? And I think we neglect the duties of the suppliers because they are not controllers, they are not processors, they are just suppliers. So what are the duties? So this is a short-term policy issue that I'm asking. The second thing is to policymakers, what do we do to address the long-term thinking which actually Antoinette is trying to express?
First question, who wants to take that one?
What would you mean by suppliers in this case? Because the term supplier can have various.
So it's precisely GE, you provide the system, but actually you do not operate it, you do not collect the data, you just sell the machine that is doing it.
So you manufacture the machines, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, clearly, in that case, we are interfering and we have certain amounts of data. The way we're functioning right now is via consent, obviously. We believe that, and we are discussing with regulators right now about, the fact that you have, this is a kind of a secondary use of data. And to the extent, you need to run some scientific research, which can happen outside the place of a university.
My point was not about your duties in terms of the data you collect, but about your duties about the data that your customer are collecting. And this is the gap.
Christian, you want to?
Well, I mean, I think the key provision in the law is on data security and privacy by design. Their obligation to have regard to the state of the art in data security when building the products. And that is as important, if not more important, as we move ahead. Appreciate that that companies such as GE would not necessarily be processing the data, but under the new regulation, there's a very clear obligation which goes right through the process from manufacturing to use.
Which is in place. I mean, we do have the privacy by design. That's every kind of product. I mean, it is embedded.
My point is that the policymakers are maybe weak in asking for it.
So I don't know if everybody heard that. Policymakers are weak in asking for that. I don't know if Christian would agree with that, but so I don't think so. I think the question has been put on the table. It's pretty strong. As Christian said, there is a requirement for privacy by design. Now we can have a discussion about what that actually means. Then, of course, when you need to translate that in whatever development process. But so you had a second question also, Antoinette.
Yes, thank you, Antonio. What should we do? Maybe it's just some very early ideas that I have. In fact, we have data protection regime, and going back to the reasons why we first thought about protecting personal data is quite interesting. In fact, data protection was designed at the beginning in order to establish a kind of balance of power between the data subjects and data controller. Balancing powers is something really at the value behind that. So nowadays, what we notice is a kind of fetishization of personal data and fetishization of individual consent and control, whereas we really notice that all this is really fiction. It has always been fiction, not maybe for personal data. Before personal data, we knew what it was. No, we know we don't know what it is anymore. And as for consent and control, in fact, we have never been the rational, autonomous subjects fantasized by liberalism. We have never been that. Psychoanalysis tells it to us, and well, all the post-humanists humanism tells it to us. So what should we do now is maybe rethink about data protection without that kind of fetishization, and thinking more about what do we care about? What do we care about? We care about equality, non-discrimination, prevention of discrimination, and as we speak of subjects, as I just mentioned before, that in fact the subject is disappearing. The point here is not protection of personal data. The risk is the disappearance of the person herself, the person as someone capable of giving account of the reasons that make her or him act in certain ways. The person as someone who can erase its traces. Rather than the rational individual. So I think the virtue of data protection is precisely that these instruments may allow for persons to arise as persons, to be heard as persons, and not only as temporary aggregates of infrapersonal data processed at high speed at an industrial scale. Because that's how we are dealt with nowadays in that new infrastructure. So for that reason, I would displace the focus. It's just ideas like that. Displace the focus from the possessive individualism of current data protection regimes, which in fact do not protect much individuals, towards accountability. I think accountability of whom? Accountability, of course, of the data subject himself. When you are judged when someone who takes a decision based on automatic recommendation, that's in the law, in fact. You should be able to give account of yourself and not to be judged according only to an automatic profile of you. You know, so then you can become a subject. But accountability also of the person who uses these systems in order to provide services, to provide you care, medical care, to orient you in a career, or to take decisions regarding your job, for example. And accountability does not mean making algorithms accountable. It does not mean that. It means making the individual who takes the decision based on automatic calculation accountable. It means that you cannot just justify a decision you take about a specific individual by saying it's an algorithm that has decided that you are a bad candidate for that job. No, you have to justify that decision, taking into account the singularity of the individual you have in front of you. And then you, the person who takes the decision, become a subject which is accountable for the decision. Deciding is not obeying to a calculation. Deciding is making a gesture that can fail, and assuming the fact that it can fail. Deciding is really keeping oneself in a just position with regard to our own ignorance, and the undecidability remains our fate, in fact.
So I saw some people shaking their heads, so people have different opinions on that apparently. But I, again, want to ask anybody who wants to ask another question. Over there? Yeah, this doesn't work, so you'll have to speak up. It's a small room, so...
So I was wondering, especially in the context of Internet of Things and the fact that we are surrounded by data and that everyone is basically collecting data without even wanting to collect personal data, don't you think that the regime that we would apply to data processing should depend on, first of all, the purpose for which it is used, depending and the risk that the purpose may bring for the person, and shouldn't there be some distinction between, like, based on the intention of a entity who's involved in processing, do I want to actually identify the person or not?
Targeted at somebody specifically on the panel, or any taker?
Probably Mrs.
Well, so...
But Antoinette, but if anyone has other comments, I would be very grateful.
Okay, thank you. I think an excellent move in regulation in that sense for the first question is the privacy impact assessment that is almost imposed, you know, and that's really interesting in terms of analyzing risks before doing things. But analyzing risks can also be a bad analysis and you can fail, but you have to be accountable for your own failure in that case. As for the distinction between applications, of course, all this must be always contextualized. But as for the intentions, I'm not sure we can count on intentions. For example, I just gave an example in the sector of big data because I know that a bit better. The use of big data in human resources management. Sometimes employers would like to rely on automatic recommendation systems in order to be more objective. They know that they can be biased against women, against black people, against etc. So they say, I want to be really objective and take decisions based on data. And that's a virtue. Huh? But in fact, the problem is that the data which has been collected from all employers of a region, for example, may be generally biased against women, say. So, and for example, these data may translate into recommendations saying that on average, men progress more in their career and are more efficient, therefore they are more efficient because they gain higher wage. You see? So it's a repercussion and a naturalization of the current state of, I would say, the distinctions of treatment, but then that naturalization makes these kinds of distinction very indistinguishable and undetectable, so you cannot contest them anymore. You see? So, so that's the reason why good intentions can really bring bad results.
Thibaut, you also,
can I interrupt
or Anna first and then Thibaut, and then we have to close actually because we're running towards the end.
Because you have to see what you have raised actually. It's the essence of a privacy impact assessment that a lot of companies are already doing. So by means of an example, I know my company, I have a couple of others that I've worked with, that I worked for before. There is a panel of specialists. You could have the HR people because we have very often, you know, HR cases. You have somebody from the privacy office, of course. So everybody is represented. There are senior officials, the chief privacy officer, and there, you know, people are logging requests where data is supposed to be implicated. And so, as you said, purpose is stated, risk is stated, whose data, where it is going, what exactly is the role, is it data you hold as controller, is it data you hold as processor, and this is documented. And in fact, now with the GDPR, this has to take something more of a formality around it, but it is being done by many companies, I think, in the last years, and these things are on file. And so to the extent we're going to encrypt data, anonymize data, de-identify data, is also stated. I think general principles of proportionality and so on have to be taken into consideration. So it's all about, you know, the integrity you have as a data controller or processor in each circumstance.
I was about actually to go in this direction as well. I mean, in your question, which I think is very legitimate, and it's something indeed that should be done in terms of privacy impact assessment. nevertheless, from a kind of Internet of Things perspective, I think we need to be also careful not to somehow prevent the IoT even to exist at all by having too much of an ex-ante barrier for things that still need to be tested and developed. So I think at some point we need probably to get to also what the GDPR allows, which is more kind of sector-specific guiding principles, codes of conduct, so kind of a meta level where you don't have to start from scratch for each and every application, but where you can really build on learning from what exists, what has been tested by others, so that you create really this trust mechanism between users, between those who are developing the systems and the solutions, and between how the data is actually part of this narrative. So creating maybe better understanding across areas and also together between users and producers is clearly something we should work on to make it implementable.
Great, thank you. So I want to hand over for a wrap-up by our chair. I want to thank also all the panelists. I always like to do these kind of little polls. Just one poll before I hand it over. You heard Thibaut mention this kind of a label that would say around kind of safety levels of IoT, something like that. Who thinks that would actually be very helpful? Can you raise your hand a bit higher? 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, I think something to explore, but there's some challenges probably. So, Christian.
Right, thank you. That was great. Really, really interesting. The best tweet, by the way, on this session was from someone who said that if Jacques Derrida thinks that only humans can cover their traces, he obviously didn't meet my cats. I think that the central message running through this entire discussion is benefit. Paul mentioned benefit. People benefit from it. The question is who benefits, what's the balance of benefits, what are the costs to others. And processing personal information is not in itself a bad thing. It's what makes the world go round. It's part of the freedom of the internal market. The question is, what should be the rules of the game? And that's really what we're talking about now. It is true in relation to the Internet of Things and big data that we do have a problem, in a potential big problem in terms of the amount of data which is flying around. It's been described as the pollution problem of our day by Bruce Schneier. So this is an externality, and we need to think about it. I think, and the sort of follow-up message from that is about implementation and enforcement, which came up in questions as well. I think the final word should go to, the final memory from this panel for me. I think Thibaut invented, either wittingly or unwittingly, a beautiful pun, calembour, the umpire strikes back. And I think that may be how some people are perceiving the General Data Protection Regulation and the potential for data protection authorities to realise the potential of their powers. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for coming.